What if the key to extraordinary success isn't found solely in individual resilience, but in the relentless rhythm of rowing together? And what if it's ultimately fueled by the compelling power of unity, alignment, and synchronized purpose? Ultimate success, ultimately, isn't a solo journey. It's a boat propelled by many oars, guided through rough waters by collective spirits, mutual commitments, and the courage to trust each other's stroke in the water. Because at the end of the day, when you cross the finish line, rowing as one isn't just about coordination. It's about connection. It's about configuration. And it's about catalyzing the combined strength of your team to create momentum like you've never experienced before. Hey, my friends, welcome back to the UNCOMMODiFiED podcast. I'm Tim Windsor, and today my guest on the show is ABBIE PECKHAM. ABBIE, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. It's going to be a great conversation. So a bit about my guest so that you can get introduced to ABBIE. ABBIE actually is the wife of one of the people that I work with at a company in the area where ABBIE and her husband Nick live. And so I got a chance to meet ABBIE at the Christmas party. And now I said, hey, you got to come on my podcast. And so here's ABBIE on my podcast. So why did I want to have ABBIE on my podcast? Well, here it is. ABBIE is the head coach of a high school girls program at Saratoga Rowing Association in Saratoga Springs, New York. By the way, if you've never been, you got to go. Beautiful place. The very place where she first fell in love with that sport of rowing as a middle schooler. As a former Division I recruit, ABBIE found her way into coaching after her own college rowing program lost its funding, and a volunteer coaching opportunity reignited her passion for the sport. ABBIE is dedicated to helping young athletes not only chase excellence on the water, but also build the resilience, confidence, and leadership skills that will serve them far beyond their rowing careers. The ultimate mission, her ultimate mission, at the end of the day, is to empower the next generation, one practice, one race, and one lesson at a time. Now, this is an uncorked conversation, ABBIE, so we're going to uncork a drink together. So I got a question. What are you drinking tonight? Now, remember, you're a coach of a rowing team. So what does a coach of a rowing team drink at nighttime?
So I'm drinking a Wegmans seltzer right now.
Oh, very nice. It's
So
a little
we
seltzer.
don't have any Wegmans near us,
Okay.
but it's funny. My whole coaching staff is obsessed with Wegmans seltzer. So whenever we go out to Western New York or Massachusetts, someone always has to stop and stockpile cases of seltzer.
Cases of seltzer.
Yep.
This is a non-alcoholic seltzer, though, right?
Correct. Yes.
Okay,
A
good. I'm glad.
non-alcoholic ginger seltzer.
Okay, well, just so you know, to balance out your non-alcoholic seltzer, I have a White Claw hard seltzer. Natural lime, though.
Yep.
But I'm going to try that. I'm going to try that on. So I don't drink a lot of these kind of drinks, but I thought I'll go seltzer, too. Cheers to you, ABBIE.
Cheers.
Okay, listen, every great conversation for me starts with a great question. So here's what I want you to think about as we start. So you're in this world. This world is very different than the world that a lot of people live in. So my question is, what's the world of boats? Are they called boats? The special
Rowing shells.
Okay, there you go. See, don't even know what they're called. So what is that world and oars and rowing and all this stuff? What does it teach you about life, leadership, and how to help people learn to fail and to flourish? What are you learning along the way, and how did you get to where you are now?
Yeah. To me, rowing teaches a lot about it's okay to fail, and a lot of the time the greatest breakthroughs and the greatest moments are on the other side of failure. And I wouldn't have gotten into this position of coaching and gone down this whole career route without feeling like I went through one of the largest failures ever. Because as a youth athlete, one of the biggest things that we're all kind of focused on is getting recruited as a Division I athlete. It's like the big focus of high school rowing. Like, you want to compete at the top level for your program, but you're also looking at that next step of how can I get recruited and continue this journey? And the funding for my collegiate program I got recruited to, the funding was cut at the end of my freshman year. And obviously I didn't have any play in that happening, but to me, it was like my life flipped upside down and it felt like a massive failure because they handed us this opportunity of, okay, like you've got 12 hours. Let us know if you want to open up to the NCAA that you're looking to get recruited to a different program or if you're not interested. And so we were
Wow.
given this super short time limit. And in my core, I just knew that at the moment, transferring to compete somewhere else didn't feel like the right step. It didn't feel like the healthiest step for me. So that felt like a huge failure for me. But down the road, that failure led to me stumbling my way into coaching, which has been like the greatest opportunity that could have fallen into my lap.
Oh, that's amazing. So for you, your story is born out of failure. There's this
Yeah.
massive failure of this program,
Yep.
and you're in the midst of this thing. You got to figure out what it looks like. And so, in fact, that takes you into a world of coaching that you may or may not have found based on the fact that something didn't happen the way you expected it, but you stepped in and said, I could move in this direction.
Yeah.
I,
I had no clue. I thought I was just going to finish my 4 years of collegiate rowing and then go on to be a physical therapist and just live a totally different life. And after I did 1 year of volunteering for a girls' school out in Buffalo, I was like, this is the coolest thing ever. And so I just started talking to any coaches that would talk to me and just riding along and following any coaches that I could follow. And I just kind of stumbled my way into some really cool opportunities. And there were some times that I worked for like pretty much no money, and my parents thought I was absolutely crazy, but I was like, this is the coolest thing ever. I'm in college when I'm going to have the opportunity to do this again. And it led to a really cool position running the high school girls team at the program that I grew up that like developed this passion for the sport.
That's amazing. So what attracted you personally to rowing in the beginning? Because obviously you had this attraction to rowing,
Yeah.
which is not. I mean, maybe it's different in the States, but for sure where I live, it's not. It's fairly atypical. Now
Yeah.
we do have a fairly significant rowing club and community, about an hour south of where I am. Where in a place called Niagara on the Lake, Ontario, you have the Henley there and all
Yep.
of this kind of stuff, which is quite famous. But how did you find your way into this rowing from a sport perspective?
Yeah, I was super fortunate where one of my best family friends had an older daughter who tried rowing out and they got a rowing machine in their basement. And
Okay.
so we were all over there for like a family party and all of us were down in the basement and she was like showing us how to use this rowing machine. And it was just fascinating because I've always enjoyed sports, but I was never like great at playing basketball or playing soccer. It just didn't really spark any joy in me. And I was like, oh, this is kind of a cool motion, and the feeling of the way that you push your legs and then pry the hands into your body and the coordination and the flow to it was really cool. And so my parents then signed me up for like a 2 week summer program. And I signed up with a few friends. And the feeling of getting into the boat and the way that your blades place into the water and how you push your legs, but you're really like hanging onto handles that are pushing the water, and the feeling to how all of that gets the rowing shell to move underneath you is the coolest feeling. And then as you add more bodies into those boats and the way that the boat speed can pick up, and one of the things that I talk about with my girls pretty frequently is when the rowing shell is moving at a really good speed and you're really cruising, you can kind of hear the bubbles running underneath the shell a little bit.
Wow.
And sometimes you're trying to get the movements to be so in time and the hull up to such a significant speed that you want to be able to hear the bubbles.
Wow.
It's the coolest feeling.
So in a sense, really, you just sort of if you're doing it right and you get some speed, you're sort of skimming across
Yeah.
the top of the
Yeah.
water.
Every
Is
time
that?
the blades enter the water, it's almost like a peg going into a pegboard, and then you're pushing against the peg to move the boat past where the peg enters. So
Huh.
the blade isn't actually moving the water. The blade is planting against the water to push the boat past that point. And so
Interesting.
every time you start with the push of your legs, the boat kind of picks up out of the water and planes on top. And so the goal is to kind of keep it running on top of the water. So a lot of the time I'll be talking with my athletes to tap the boat along. Don't let the boat settle down into the water.
Okay, interesting. So again, I know nothing about this world, so this is a great conversation for me because oftentimes when I'm in a conversation, I know a fair amount about the worlds I'm talking about. I know zero about this world, so and I love to learn. So this is great for me. So help me understand. So the skills, the technique and skill required to row single,
Yes.
and the technique and the skills required to row with multiple people in a boat. What's the maximum people you could have in a? Sorry, and I know it's not called a boat.
It's okay.
What's it called again?
A shell.
A shell. Okay, it seems strange to me, but a shell. It's like we're gliding in a peanut. What the heck is this? A shell. Okay, what's the maximum number of people who row in a shell?
So the maximum number of people would be 8 rowers and then 1 coxswain.
Okay,
So 9 people total, but only 8 of them would have oars.
okay, so it could be up to 8 and as few as 1.
Yep.
Okay, so the skill set required and technique to row as an individual, and then compare that to rowing with 2 people, 3 people, 4 people, whatever. Is it fundamentally different or is it subtly different?
It's subtly different. There are 2 different types of rowing. There's sculling and then sweep, and those 2 are fairly different types of styles because sculling, each athlete only has 1 oar,
Oh,
but in sculling they have 2.
okay.
So with that, you're dealing with like 1 handle versus 2 handles. So there's a decent amount of difference there. But the core concept of the movement is very, very simple. You have we start from the catch position, which is where the blade enters the water. Your shoulders are slightly in front of your hips. Your knees are pulled up towards your chest and your arms are out long. Your blade enters in that position and you push your legs, you swing your shoulders behind your hips, and then you pull your hands into the body. And then to get back into that position, it's just the opposite. So your hands move out first, your shoulders lean forward, and then your knees draw upwards. So the core concept of the movement is very simple. And there are a lot of coaches out there who love to kind of dissect the stroke and make it super, super complicated and work very itty-bitty parts of it. Which that I find to be quite helpful for racing the single. But when you're working with a larger team boat, it's much easier to focus on like the big, simple concepts and executing them extremely well. And especially with the youth level, the more complicated you make it for them, the less you're usually going to get out of it.
Oh, fair enough. And by the way, I think that's not just for youth. I think that is in general life. And
Yeah.
and again, those of you who listen on a regular basis, that I like to draw lessons along the way of things I hear. But I think that's a really good life lesson. Is that, again, we often think that where wisdom and where all this efficiency is going to lie is in this complexity, but actually it's about breaking it down into its simplest form. That doesn't matter if it's in business or in life, but breaking something down to its simplest form, its most repeatable and sustainable form, usually brings better success. So there's probably a correlationship there. So let me ask you, is being in sync, being synchronized, if I'm in a boat with multiple people, is it, depending on whether it's 1 oar or 2 or how I'm doing that, is that critical to success, or am I asynchronous or synchronous with the people I'm in? How is this working?
So the goal is to be as synchronous as possible with the team with you.
Okay.
It is totally normal to have some bits of the stroke that aren't absolutely perfect because you're also working within the boat. I primarily coach 8s. So there's 8 rowers, 1 coxswain. Within the 8, I'm going to have 8 different girls of different heights with different leg lengths, with different torso lengths. So there's going to be a little bit of some of my girls that are a little bit shorter are going to have to slow down their movements a little bit more to stay perfectly in time with the girls who are very long and lanky.
Interesting.
And so there's some manipulation within the machine, within the shell itself and how it's set up to help match all of that up. But there's a little bit of fluctuation in trying to get that overall bigger picture to match up. So for some people, they're going to have to move their hands a little bit slower. For some people, they're going to have to lift their knees a little bit quicker. to get that one fluid movement to it. So there's in the big picture, everything moves as one, but
Yeah.
as a coach, sometimes I'm dissecting individual by individual to get that picture together.
That's interesting, and again, and that's just fascinating to me because I think about my life, or I think about in business, and sometimes again we have this idea that we're going to all go at our own pace, and it's all individuality that contributes to the whole. But what you're
Mhm.
telling me here is there is some adaptation or giving up or matching towards my partners in the boat, in the shell, that is helpful, because if I don't, because we're different, because in this case, because we're different body types, heights, etc., it creates a disconnection or creates disunity.
Yep.
But so actually creating an adaptation of one rower creates the connection to the other. That is very interesting, because again, I think that we have this idea of how we live in this hyper individualized world where it's all about us. What this is telling me is sometimes I have to look around and match something, my cadence, my rhythm, my whatever it would be, to someone else for the greater good of what I'm trying to accomplish. And again, if you're listening in, maybe ask yourself, what does that mean to you? Are you in an environment where you're trying to do something together with a team, and you have to understand or ask, what's the subtle adaptation that you need to make for the benefit of the whole, or the benefit of what you're trying to accomplish? That is a really interesting sort of subtlety to the world that you work in. I love that. That's interesting. Very fascinating. Okay, help me understand this. What I don't understand, so if I have 6 rowers in a boat, there's no coxswain.
Yep.
But if there's 8 rowers in a boat, now I have a coxswain.
Yes.
Help me understand the history and tradition. How does this work? I don't understand all of a sudden. Why is there, now we need somebody to tell us what to do? What happened?
Yeah. So the coxswains with the 8-person boats, we require having the coxswain just because the potential speed of those boats is so fast that it could be dangerous if you don't have somebody like at the helm actually steering.
Oh, really?
Because also, if you think about it, the direction that the rowers are facing is the opposite direction of the boat way the boat is going.
Right.
And so when you're in a smaller boat, so most of the boat classes, we have 8s, which are only sweeping. And then we have our 4-person boats, which are quads or 4s. And those can be with or without a coxswain. So we've got opportunity on both ends of that. And then all of our doubles and singles, none of those have coxswains.
Okay.
So the doubles and singles, you don't have coxswains in there because they're moving a lot slower, and then it would be a lot of dead weight for 1 to 2 people to move.
Okay. So again, my ignorance about rowing is going to be revealed. So when you row, because I think I've watched Olympic rowing every once in a while, but I have to admit I must not be attentive. Are you telling me that all the time when rowing is happening, people are rowing facing backwards to where they're going?
Yeah.
Okay, so how does that work? Because how do you now you have no bearings? Like how does that work? Because would find that, when I row in a boat, I like to look where I'm going.
Yeah.
Uh,
It's a
how
little
does
bit
this work?
disorienting.
Yeah.
So the nice thing is most of our championship racing happens on a fully buoyed course.
Hmm.
So one cool opportunity of facing the opposite direction of the way that the boat is going is, especially if you're in the lead, you get to see all of the competitors behind you.
Okay.
Versus if you're facing the other way, when you get out ahead, you don't know what's going on right behind you.
Right.
So that's one cool perk to that. And the nice thing about being in the buoyed lanes is you just have to stay parallel.
Okay.
So if you're in a boat without a coxswain, it's actually fairly simple to go straight on a buoyed course.
Okay.
In the fall season, we don't race on fully buoyed lane courses. They're actually much longer races, which one race we go to is the head of the Charles, which is 5,000 meters and weaves through Boston. You're crossing under multiple bridges. You're going through multiple turns.
Oh, wow.
And there are plenty of events of boats without coxswains, and so those rowers usually have steering cables attached to one of their shoes, and their shoe can pivot, and so as they turn their toe, the rudder will move. And so they're focusing in on either rowing their single to the best. Usually there's not steering in singles, that's all pressure steering, just pulling harder on one side or the other. But doubles and quads will have that toe steering. So you're focused on rowing with your shell in perfect timing while also taking peeks over your shoulders on both sides to make sure you're like taking the turns correctly and also watching out for others around you. Because in those races, you're started one at a time with about 10 seconds in between. So there's the opportunity to pass boats or be passed.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, now it's interesting. I would not have realized that you have some races where they're turning. I'm always thinking it's just a dead straight race, but again, and my ignorance precedes me on this matter. So I'm learning lots today about rowing. So let me ask you. So when you look at your career as a coach and the girls in your program, because there's girls in your program who've come and gone, and you look at what values that you think this experience beyond the technicality of rowing and all the rowing experience, what life or leadership lessons or values do you think this is instilling in those young women that you believe will sort of carry them into the future?
Yeah. To me, some of the biggest core values that I think come out of this sport is learning how to be resilient and also learning the power of being a part of a team.
Yeah.
I feel like there's so many highs and lows in rowing, and especially because there's so many uncontrollable variables in our sport. Rowing out on the water every single day, we get different conditions every day we go out there. And a lot of the time, the wind will change halfway through our practice, and we have to adapt. And we try to focus in on one of our biggest phrases within our team is, as long as you show up with good attitude and good effort, like, you've won the day. And no matter how poorly the row goes, as long as you approached it with good attitude and you gave all the effort that you have, that's okay. And they learn to approach that on the days where the boat's running perfectly and they're hitting the numbers that they should be hitting and they're just cruising. But also on the days where the boat just doesn't seem to pick up right or something breaks during practice. Like, at the end of those days, it's like, yeah, that's a bummer, but how's your attitude and effort? And they're like, you know what, like, it was really good. It's like, that's a win. We got the job done. And over time, like, watching the girls become okay with the days that aren't perfect and just like give themselves the credit for showing up has been huge. And watching them carry that into just how they manage themselves through school. Because my kids come directly from school to practice. We start practice at 3:30 every day. They usually get us out of school at somewhere between 2:20 and 2:40. And some of them will come from school and have like the worst day possible. I had a girl call me maybe 3 weeks ago. She was in a McDonald's parking lot sobbing her eyes out because she got some really bad news from a college coach and like nothing was going right that day. And I was like, I totally support whatever you need today, but I think being around your teammates and being present in the moment could be good for you. Like, your teammates are always here. They're showing up for you. Like, are you going to be able to show up for them? And I was like, if you really need the day, you can take it, but just like take a few breaths, call me back, like, let me know what you want to do. She ended up coming to practice, and we had a really, really hard indoor workout that day before we went onto the water. And she hopped off the machine after the hard indoor workout and walked over to me and hugged me and was like, thank you so much. Like, that's actually exactly what I needed. And if we didn't have that conversation, I wouldn't have had this.
Wow.
And so I think I'm in a really cool opportunity to teach them that sometimes you just got to show up when you're a little bit scared. And the more frequently they get to have those opportunities, the more it's going to stick to their core.
Yeah, it's super powerful. I mean, and I love that. I mean, again, think about the simplicity of the wisdom that Abbie's just talking about. I mean, are you showing up with the right attitude? Like, again, are you coming and being present? Are you showing up? Do you have the right attitude? And again, you can apply that anywhere if you're listening, because sometimes I hate to say that we have shitty attitudes. Like, like our ass is in the seat, but our attitudes are not great. So really simple life advice. But if you think about that, if they carry that forward into their workplaces or their communities, showing up, being present. Your teammates are showing up for you, showing up for them. All of these things are wonderful lessons. And it's interesting what you said about how out of control you are of the environment that you're rowing in. A lot of sports, there's a lot of sports that do have elements of unpredictability, but there's a lot of sports that, millions of dollars are spent grooming that field and making sure it's perfect. And, some little speck of something gets on it and it's got to come off because, there's this pristine sense of the playing field. Whereas your playing field, the water, which is unpredictable, that has its own mind, you've got winds, you've got all these things, again, speaks to that idea of resilience and adaptability in the moment. Because, the old adage is, a poor sailor blames the wind, right? There's this adage. So let me ask you, when wind comes against people, when wind comes and puts them off course or puts them behind, is there strategies that you can use to sort of make yourself more aerodynamic, or because of the way you're rowing and the rhythm, is that quite impossible, or can you adapt to that environment in any way?
There's some small adaptations you can make. There's some technical skills that we work on pretty consistently, but the girls know if the wind kicks in, this is where our brain has to go.
Okay.
So the water that we train on and we actually do a lot of our racing on is generally known for having pretty terrible water, specifically on racing weekends. It's kind of funny, but it's good because we get to practice in it. We spend so much time in it that our kids are kind of unfazed. But the biggest thing is making sure that we are connecting with the water as quickly as possible. When you get up towards the catch where the blade needs to go in, a lot of teams will have some hesitation, or they'll actually start the leg drive before the blade is connected with the water. So we focus a lot on how can we fine tune and get the blade connected as quickly as possible, so we have something to push against to get the boat up and out of the water and moving. There are also some changes in the equipment that we can make that'll change the load and this or that, but the kids don't really know too much about that. That's something that the coaches just kind of do on our own. But we talk a lot about, okay, it's really windy. We need to make sure that we're sitting tall with good posture, and so we can connect with the water as quickly as possible.
Interesting. So it's interesting the way you describe it, because again, when I'm watching it, I'm just thinking about this boat, but it's a shell going across the water. You're describing the water as almost as the connective point to launch yourself. So you're describing the water very differently than I would see it. You're also using, from a physics perspective, you're obviously creating a mechanical advantage. In a sense, this is a lever and a fulcrum that's at work in the shell, but also, if I'm understanding you correctly, in the water, because you place the blade, you don't even call it an oar, onto the surface of the water, into the water. You propel yourself out of the water and forward, almost in a leveraged position almost. Yeah. So that's interesting to me, because again, I think about this when I hear these kind of things. I think about how it applies to my life. I think about how it applies to business, whatever. But this idea for me is this is a great challenge. Like, where am I putting my blade into something and propelling myself forward, giving myself some leveraged advantage in the races that I'm running, whether that's in my community, in my family, in my mental life, my social life, my spiritual life, if I think about my life that way. But in business, what are we putting our blade into, and sort of sticking it in there and saying, we can use this to leverage ourselves and push us forward? Because you're describing the process of rowing very different than I would think of it as somebody observing. Am I getting the physics of this thing? Am I tracking with you?
Yeah, that's absolutely it. A lot of people see rowing and think that it's a pulling sport,
Yeah.
but we really try to flip that, and it's really a pushing sport. You place your blade and you push against the feet, which is you're hanging off the handle and pushing off the water to leverage the boat up and out and get it running.
That's fat. Now again, because I know nothing about this, this is fascinating to me because I would never perceive that. But as you're describing it, I'm seeing a more of a connection to me about how what leveraged advantage. And I often talk when I'm training leaders, but often salespeople. I talk about this idea of identifying as Archimedean in our thinking. Of course, Archimedes famously said, "Give me a lever long enough and a fulcrum well placed, I could move the world." So mathematically, he was correct. It's the principle of leverage. And so I often talk about what does creating leverage with our client or in a market look like, and what can we, in this case, what do we stick that blade or that thing we have? How do we stick it into the market and pull ourselves or push ourselves forward? You're using the same analogy from a rowing perspective, which is quite fascinating to me. So listen, this is an interesting conversation. Again, if you're listening in, I always say you're listening for a reason. Don't forget that. And you might not be a rower, but how can you apply these things in your life and in your business? That would be my challenge to you. Hey, I got a question, and we haven't talked about any of this, but have you ever rowed in Niagara on the Lake in Canada at the
Yeah.
Henley? Oh, you
Yeah,
have?
so I raced at Canadian Henley multiple times when I was in high school.
Okay.
I also now have the opportunity to coach my athletes there during the summers.
Oh,
It's a
wow.
big historic thing that our program has always gone to. And something kind of crazy about that event is they only award medals for the first place winners.
Interesting.
Yeah, a lot of regattas will medal one through three, but it's like a big deal to win Canadian Henley, and you've got to come in first to get pulled into the awards dock and get your medals and your plaque with your team. It takes a lot to win that event, and it's when you do, it's one of the coolest things.
That's amazing. Now, also, I'll take a flyer on this. So, a number of years ago, as part of my business and different things that I've done, I had a partnership with a physician in the Niagara area, and we built a series of medical clinics. And at the medical clinic, at one point, we had a bunch of doctors working for us, and one of the doctors that worked for us, his name was Tom Mazzoni. Tom, in addition to being a physician in Canada, was the rowing coach, one of the rowing coaches at the University of Buffalo for like eons. So that was kind of interesting because he had this whole other sort of side hustle, a side gig, in position to be, and so he was a coach at the University of Buffalo. And when I first started my podcast years ago, I had Jeremiah Brown on my podcast, and Jeremiah Brown, his claim to fame is quite interesting. So he was a Canadian Olympic silver medalist, I think in the fours. I forget what year it was. It might have been two or three two Olympics ago, maybe or so, maybe four, three. And his story is that he was a couch potato, overweight, eating chips on a couch when you're watching the Olympics, watching rowing, and he makes a decision and says, I'm gonna do that next Olympic and make the team, and he does. He goes from never having rowed in his life to making the Olympic team and winning a silver medal. I mean, it's a crazy, crazy story. I can't imagine that would be very typical. But okay, let me ask you: if I was going to become a rower, which by the way, I'd probably die, I'd have a heart attack. But let me ask you: is it muscle strength, body muscle strength in your arms and legs? Is it cardio that's more important? Is it have to be both, or I'm gonna die?
It
Help
really
me
has to be
understand.
both. It's you work both your aerobic and anaerobic system during racing. So your body has to be primed for both. And also it takes a lot of leg strength and also core strength. So your core helps connect the power because you're hanging off of the handle with your arms. And so your core supports you to hold that leverage as you let the legs work. So it really is a full body movement, but training the aerobic and anaerobic systems is vital to success in rowing.
Okay, so just full confession then. I ain't not rowing anywhere and any time, because I will die. That will not work. That will not work for me, Abby. So listen, Abby, love the conversation. And again, if you're listening in, listeners, you're listening for a reason. Ask how do you apply this and figure it out. Now, maybe some of you want to go if you've got the body and the stamina and the skill. Maybe you want to go learn to row. You should do that. But other than that, if you don't do that, maybe you got to take some of these ideas and put them to work in your life and your business and in your community and your family, and ask lessons can I take into that. So because this is the Uncommodified podcast, Abby, and we're gonna bring this plane in for a landing, I always like to explore this idea. For me, this idea of uncommodification isn't just applied or shouldn't be just applied to business and to products and this kind of stuff that we think of as traditional commodities. But I actually believe that one of the challenges in life is that we can become commodities, that we're coached and cajoled into sitting down and shutting up and fitting in and giving up some of our uniqueness for the sake of being acceptable, which is on one level okay, but on another level we can give too much of that. So I'm interested to know about people's unique expressions. So when Abby's going into a room, or when Abby goes to the side of the lake or the side of the river, and you're bringing only what Abby can bring, when you're bringing the Abby, like full on the Abby, what unique contribution do you think that you tend to make in those environments that you believe is positively influencing that environment for the benefit of the people there?
Yeah. So I always come back to when I'm in those moments, I'm so unbelievably present. No matter
Mm.
what else has happened within my day, it doesn't matter. I have these 2.5, 3 hours with this awesome group of kids who are there showing up for the team. I'm going to be just as present as I'm asking them to be. But I also have so much faith and trust in their potential that I'm going to hold them to it.
Mm.
And sometimes it's really easy conversations with the kids. And then sometimes it's kind of harsh conversations that I have to have, but I am having them and holding to them to these points because I know that they can achieve these things. And some kids, I have to kind of read the room, and everybody responds to different types of coaching differently. And so I try to trust myself to know how different kids respond to some things, and with the kids who can handle some like tough feedback, like give it to them, because I am there to help them become the best athlete and teammate, and sometimes they need to hear it straight. And it all comes from a trust and belief that they are capable, and it comes from a really, really great place. But I think sometimes people are so used to sugarcoating and being so soft and like not saying it as it is. And so I try to be straightforward and hold them to what I know they're capable of.
Wow, powerful. So there's this wonderful gift of presence, being present with people, that is part of the unique thing that you can bring. But then, not only present in a way that is always just sort of saying, well, you're doing a great job. There's a presence that says, hey, I believe in you enough to say, we could get our game on here. You can do this better. We can do this better, which I think is really important, because sometimes we want to be unusually kind with people, but not unusually honest. And I think these things have to be married together. We
Yes.
have to be unusually respectful, unusually kind, unusually present, while being not but and unusually candid, unusually frank, for the positive benefit of people hearing that which is true, to catalyze them to a greater output or effect. So, what a great contribution, Abby, and I love it. And again, maybe that's your unique contribution too, listeners, and you need to bring more of that. I know that's a great challenge for me. Abby, really appreciate the conversation today. And I wanted this duly noted on the podcast forever, so whenever it's played anywhere in the world, we will all remember that Nick, Abby's husband, is currently doing the dishes. Now, come on. Now that is a modern man.
Yep. Yep.
Nick is a modern man.
He does a good job. He knows what
Sweet.
to do.
So listen, if you're looking for a dishwasher, you can't have Nick, because Abby's Abby's got him taken, so he can't have Nick. But Nick is doing a wonderful job with the dishes, and I believe every once in a while I heard a clanking pan in the background. Listen, Abby, thank you so much for your time. Again, if you listened in, you listened for a reason. Do me a favor. As you uncork this conversation into your life, as we've uncorked a drink together, DM me or send me an email at tim@uncommodified.com and tell me and Abby, how are you processing this, and what are you doing? And what are you thinking about as you think about this great journey that you could take? Because this is so important, because remember what I said when we started. At the end of the day, listen, when you cross the finish line, rowing as one isn't just about coordination. It is about connection. It is about configuration. It is about catalyzing the combined strength of your team to create momentum like you've never, ever experienced in your whole life. Thanks for listening in today. Cheers. Have a wonderful day.